actually on his way to Jamaica. He was going to Glasgow to get a boat, and he stopped in Edinburgh to see the publishers who he sent his poetry to, and they said, no, we're going to publish this book. That's actually really what happened. He didn't go to Jamaica, otherwise he'd have gone to Jamaica. But I live in a parallel universe, like most of us here, I'm sure. In my universe, Bob Marley didn't actually die. And it's his 65th birthday next Saturday.
Shares my flat with me.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm prescient because I've been in tune with what happens on that day. Bob Marley put down the cell phone on which Barack Obama had just called to congratulate him on his 65th birthday. As United Nations Ambassador at Large for the developing world, Bob was used to communing with august individuals, yet speaking with the first black president of the United States never failed to stir him to his very core. The man was no lighter skinned than Bob Marley himself, and Bob could remember the condescending, contemptuous attitudes of American white rock audiences towards him when he and the Wailers had started out. So, society had changed. In many ways, Bob realised, as he glanced around his football pitch-sized living room in London's Highgate, in the house which he had named Aya Ites, that he had bought 10 years previously from Sting. On the wall nearest was a framed photograph of himself with Nelson Mandela, taken within less than a week of the South African's release from prison, when Bob immediately had flown to be by his side. It was around the time of Mandela's release from prison that Bob had decided to base himself in London. The English capital was midway between the Caribbean and Africa, to which continent increasingly he had been drawn since visiting the serenely peaceful country of Senegal, where he had purchased a compound on a beach close to the capital of Dakar. Furthermore, many of Bob's children were now based in London. Following that 1980 health scare that had been cured by plants that grew around the site of the Ark of the Covenant in Axum in Ethiopia, in 1983, Bob had set up Ital Foods, a runaway success which had led to ackee and saltfish pizzas now being the top flavour globally. Yes, not wishing any of his children to become ensnared by the cutthroat world of the music business, he had entrusted them with the running of Ital Foods, on which they had excelled. Taking a sip of ganja tea, Bob had not smoked a spliff since 1980, he glanced out of the window at the jogging trails that divided Hampstead Heath. Along these paths he would still regularly run, although the days when he would be accompanied by a nagging Madonna, "If you can't keep up with me, don't bother coming," were long in the past. No wonder his amorous affair with her had been so brief. After that 1980 illness, Bob Marley had temporarily disappeared from public gaze. He had made his first return to the stage in Jamaica in November 1982. Aware that the Clash had been miffed that they had given him backstage passes for their London White Riot tour shows, yet had not received any tickets in return for Bob's Rainbow gigs, he had sought them out when that month they had played a festival in Montego Bay. During the Clash's encore, Bob Marley had appeared on stage with the group, accompanied by Lee Perry and Junior Mervyn, performing a version of Police and Thieves that had segued into Armageddon Time and then into Punky Reggae Party. Yes! The tumultuous audience response had delayed the start of the next act set, that by Bob's old spar, Peter Tosh. Following the release of his Confrontation album in 1983, Bob Marley had embarked on an enormous world tour that had taken in shows in such uncharted territory as then communist Moscow. Many attributed the collapse of the Soviet Empire to the pair of concerts performed in Red Square. Yes! At Live Aid in 1985, he unexpectedly had been joined on stage by Bob Geldof, who attempted to harmonise with him on Redemption Song, whispering in his ear that the tune needed a more up-tempo feel. Before Bob could reply, Family Man, back in the group after Robbie Shakespeare had joined up with Bob Dylan, had kicked the Irishman's batty into the photographer's booth. For much of the 1990s, Bob Marley had based himself in Africa, in Senegal, Ghana, where it seemed his roots lay, and in Ethiopia. For a number of years in Ethiopia, he had lived the simple life of a farmer, rising every morning at 5 a.m. and tilling the fields until dusk. To a large extent, he vanished from the eyes of the world. On a trip to Nigeria, however, he'd fallen in with Femi Kuti. Although Bob's voice was still powerful, there was a slight deterioration of the higher octave ranges, and on his 2002 stadium tour of Africa, he had been joined on stage by Femi, guesting as a second vocalist, boosting the harmonies still performed by variants of the I3s, including Rita Marley, with whom Bob continued to share a kind of marriage. The album that resulted from that African tour, Bob Marley Live at the Apocalypse, sold over 40 million copies worldwide, surpassing even his own Legend compilation. Downing a glass of Irish moss, another staple of Ital Foods, Bob balanced a football on his forehead, heading it up and catching it 65 times, the number of his years. And then he picked up his Gibson guitar, working on a tricky part he needed to master before Jerry Damas came over later for further work on songs that he first had begun writing at the time of the Free Nelson Mandela record. Jay-Z had offered to produce the tunes, and Bob was anxious to finish them.